Today's podcast is going to be a little bit different. We're going to take one of our crew cast, which is an exclusive podcast that we do just for our VIP Table Talk crew members, link in bio. And what I did was I prompted GPT-4 to interview me. And it's actually pretty interesting what the questions were. I was blindsided by a few of them. So we're going to start with my injury history. Then we're going to move on into the motivations behind EliteFTS. And then there's questions about Westside stories, the most impressive thing I've ever seen in the gym, screwed up things I've seen in the meet. All those will be part of the extended version that if you join the crew, you'll be able to have access to. So let's get started. It's time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. All right, guys, special edition of the Table Talk VIP Crewcast. For the extended version, join the crew. The link will be in the description. This is going to be a little bit of a different podcast. It's going to be a fun podcast. I've spent some time queuing up my GPT to interview me. And I put in every ebook I've ever loaded and every other thing possible. So the questions that I previewed are kind of all over the map, but there are a lot of questions that people normally won't ask because I did prompt in there, ask me questions that nobody would ask or people would be afraid to ask, and general questions across the board. So there's the topics that are going to be in here are, my early training days, Westside barbell stories, a lot of the stupid crap that I've done in the past, injuries, PEDs, you name it, it's all going to be in here. The way that I've set this up is it's going to prompt me questions. And if I want to answer it, I'll just click A, and then it will capture that I answered it and then move to the next question. If I don't want to answer it, I'm going to click N, and it's just going to jump to the next question. So without further ado, we're just going to get into this. So the first question is, and here's the other thing, I don't know what the questions are going to be at this point. I do believe there is going to be some kind of segmentation to the questions, but it's GPT. I could be completely wrong. So we'll see, stay tuned and find out. The first question is, can you provide an overview to your total injury history and how those injuries have impacted your training career? Injuries get brought up a lot in the podcast, and I've had a lot. So for this, to make it more entertaining, I'm going to speak about every injury. Now, I'm not going to talk about like minor pulls and stuff like that. And the best way to do this is to start from my feet and work up to my head. So the first thing I'll get with would be plantar fasciitis. Now, this started towards the back end of my powerlifting career when I was heavier. I also think that extreme band use had a little bit to play into all this. And it got so bad. If you don't know what plantar fasciitis is, the easiest way I can explain it is it hurts bad. Anytime you walk, it's hard to walk. It's the inside of your foot where the plantar fascia is. And any pressure on that is just horrid. The worst time for it is right when you wake up. So at its peak, when it was at its peak, I guess is the best way to explain that. I have hardwood floors in my house. So I would have to put towels next to my bed. So when I get out of bed and I'd step on each towel, and then I would slide myself into the bathroom, to be able to go to the bathroom, take a shower and stuff like that, and try to stretch out the plantar fasciitis as best as I possibly could. And that's how each morning started for quite a while. I had no problem squatting, and I had no problem with anything in the gym because the issue with the plantar fasciitis wasn't so much that the pain, but the pain was only there when there was pressure on it. So when you'd walk, there's pressure, then no pressure, and then pressure and no pressure. And that's where it was just complete pain in the butt. That's where the sliding helped. And during this course of time that I was dealing with it, I was trying everything from, massage therapy, deep tissue therapy, needling. Cortisone shots did help, but the person who gave the shot needed to know what they were doing, because sometimes it didn't help. And the side effects of that for me as well is I'd have hiccups for 24 hours straight. So there's a lot of stories about that, dealing with the hiccups. One of my better ones there is the time my wife came home and I was out back with a garden hose shoved down my throat, because I took that chugging water, because sometimes it did work, to the furthest extreme, and figured if I could just basically water bong myself with a garden hose, then it would go away. It didn't work. Don't suggest doing that. And what did eventually help were a couple things. The first was I had a physical therapist suggest that I walk on gravel. That made a difference. That definitely helped. I did use arch supports for a long while. That provided some relief, but created greater issues down the line because it wasn't allowing my foot to sprawl. So anybody that's using the arches, unless their doctor tells them not to do otherwise, I'm not a doctor, I would highly suggest that you use them only when you absolutely have to. And then while you're at home, walk around in bare feet. So that was part of it as well. The cortisone, as I said, did kind of help. But getting back to the squatting, the reason that didn't hurt is because that pressure, while the weight is on your back, it hurts, but it doesn't hurt and unhurt, hurt and unhurt. So I have no issue with the pain just being the pain, because you can get used to that. But it was that pulsating of that to kind of wrap up the plantar fasciitis. When I was on vacation one year, we went to a lazy river, and when you're big/fat, that poses its own challenges, such as getting in the freaking inner tube. So, you know how you got to, maybe you don't know, you got to like push it over to the side by the steps. You got to have somebody hold it. Then you got to kind of like fall into it and then figure out later how you're going to get out. Where that was the general strategy. At some point throughout this lazy river, I fell off of it because that's what I do. And when I went to how I thought I was going to be able to do this is amazing to me thinking back on it. I thought I was going to be able to jump, from the 3 foot of water or whatever the hell it is into the tube. And when I went to do it, there was a snap and my left plantar fascia. So at that point, I thought I really did something bad, because it was like stick cracking. So I went to the foot doctor for my brain's not working this morning.
Podiatrist?
Yeah, whatever they're called. The foot guy, the foot doctor, to get a cortisone shot. And as he was feeling in there, what he told me was I actually tore it. And a lot of the times, one of the procedures they do to relieve it is to actually go in and slice it. So basically I did surgery to myself. And so never had an issue with that one ever again. Never had an issue with the other one actually ever again either. And I did have, after that, I was purposely trying to tear it so I would never have to have issues with it again. But the main solution for that was probably the walking on the gravel for me and the spending more time in bare feet. So, man, if I do this with every injury, this is going to go on for forever. As I work up, broken toes. So being in a weight room for 4 decades of my life, there's always accidents to where you drop plates on your toe. One of the worst ones was when I was working as a trainer. The client had a plate, a quarter, and a plate, because when it comes to loading of things unless it's main lifts. I've always kind of been one of those type of people that I don't care what it looks like. So if I got to load, plate, dime, quarter, plate, 5, I don't care. Weight's weight. It's just training. So when I was stripping the weight off after his set, I pull the first plate off. Then I go right for the second 45-pound plate to pull that off, forgetting that the quarter's on there. So it comes off, whaps into my toe. Hurts like hell, as you can imagine, but been there, done that. So just walking around and training people the rest of the day. And one of my clients came in a couple hours later and asked me if I spilled something on my shoe. And when I looked down to it was my right. When I looked down my right shoe, the whole toe area was red. So I excused myself, went back, again, being very big at the time. So getting your shoes off is a task in itself. And so went back, got the shoe off, my sock is full of blood, pull that off. And then my toe is messed up. So I went to the massage therapist that was part of the club at the time because I can't really reach my toes. And she stuck in cotton and then taped it and whatever from there. And the thing with broken toes, if you've had it before, is it hurts all the time and it hurts forever. And then just one day it just doesn't hurt anymore. So it completely went away. Again, this was nothing that impacted training in any way whatsoever. It's almost kind of like the plantar fasciitis in a way, because the more pressure you put on it, the more it's going to hurt, But several broken toes. Now, as I move up, I don't believe I've ever had any ankle injuries that I can remember. No Achilles tendons injuries that I can ever remember. When I get into the calves, apparently I tore both of my gastroc medialis, I believe. And I didn't know it. So when I found out, I kind of remember now, but there was the first time I dieted down to look like a bodybuilder. But when I dieted down to get lean, and of course you're training calves at that time more than most. And I used to have big calves, all through my career. And as I got leaner and leaner and leaner, something just looked wrong with both of them. It looked like half of it was gone. Half of it was gone. So when I went in to see my doctor, I believe that was Dr. Serrano at the time, just to ask him what is up with this? I don't understand how my muscle could actually change shape like this. And basically I tore both of them. So when I think back there at Westside, there was a phase to where we started with the bands and then it became more bands. Then it just became extreme bands. And thinking back, I remember a time to where my calves hurt all the time. And I think it was sometime throughout that training phase where I basically tore both calves. Knees, never really any injuries with the knees, a strain here and there, nothing, no surgeries, nothing that really stopped training in any way whatsoever. I can maybe one time, thinking back in high school when I thought squatting down to and off of really high pins would be a great idea, because if I could, my squat might have been in mid 6s at the time, that if I could have 800 or 900 pounds and do, I don't even want to say a quarter squat, like an 8 squat, well, then the 600 pounds should always feel light. And I remember doing multiple repetitions with whatever the weight was, but 800 or more. My knee was messed up and I had to use crutches for 2 days. And then after that, it was fine. So that's when it gets to knees, that's really the only issues that I've ever had. Now I'll get to this later. I won't be surprised if they need to be replaced 10 years from now, because the hips are kind of a different thing when I get to that. So going from the knees into the quads. Now we get into the quads. Never a quad tendon tear, but I have torn my IT band, which was kind of a pain in the butt, because that's another one that takes a long time to heal, but one that I could train through. There's, adductors. I've pulled both adductors bad. The first one, when I was still competing, that again, I could train through that. You just wrapped it up with duct tape and knee wraps and kind of move along through that way. But the quad, the biggest issues I've ever had with quads and legs would be, I took a quad shot one time, which I've never done. And I don't want to say never, but not consistently. Before that one that I'm speaking about, maybe 5 times in my entire life. And why I decided to do it was off the suggestion of a friend of mine at the time. And so went ahead and did that. It starts burning and swelling a little bit after that, so it's just inflamed or bacteria, who the hell knows what it is, but lumping up. But it got to a point where it was hard to walk. And I went in to see the doctor about it, because it was one of those things I couldn't train through, I couldn't train around, and it hurt a lot. And the advice I was told was to put heat on it, which may have been the right advice, but my brain doesn't operate that way. So I put the hottest things I could possibly put on it for pretty much as long as I possibly could. And it just got worse and worse and worse. So when I went back a week later, now my whole my whole quad is red. The pain is immense. And I believe the doctor was telling me is, this looks like you have, flesh eating bacteria, eating its way up through the leg. And after more conversations and talking about it, what I did is I burnt my leg on top of the cyst or whatever, which was underneath there because of the bad shot. So that one ended up putting me out of training for at least the lower body for probably a month, and had to wear a bandage around it, that whole time, and ointment and all this other kind of crap. That again, right before that happened, everything happens when I go to Myrtle Beach. So the plantar fasciitis tearing Myrtle Beach. This whole thing was, that whole trip in Myrtle Beach was me limping around with an ace bandage around my leg. So where are we at now? So we're still moving up. Balls, I had one max effort session where I think I blew my balls off. And so they doubled in size. I didn't go to see the doctor with that one. I guess it wasn't that big of a negative, and no pain really associated with that. Eventually that kind of went away. Coming up through, getting into the abdominal region, there was once the lower abs, I don't know if it was a tendon or psoas, you start dealing with stuff like that, you really don't know what that was, but that was a pop type of thing that was, and all these things that I'm talking about were things that were either hurt really bad or really impacted the training. Otherwise, I wouldn't remember it, because things like hamstring pulls here and there, I don't remember those. I'm sure there's been some, but it's not even really on the radar. These things were things like, oh crap, this is going to screw up the training cycle or whatnot. So the solution to that one was, again, just wearing my duct tape and wearing my belt lower. That that was another one that was kind of like the groin when I had issues with that. It took forever to go, kind of like the broken toe, like takes forever to start to feel right again. But then you just realize one day it doesn't hurt anymore. So there was training around that one coming up through. If I'm dealing with, lower back, spine, and stuff like that, what my imagery says and what my MRI says is probably not great. As far as the lower lumbar, there's really not any damage there, but as I get up through there, cervical, there's fused shit and bulges and stuff like that, but nothing that's ever really interrupted the training. If I ever had an issue in training with the lower back, it would be what I call, it popped out, it's basically just strained the lower back. Normally that may happen on a Monday when I was at West, so max effort day. Usually by the time squats would come around on Friday, I'd be fine. That wasn't just the resting, that was very active. So when it would pop or strain or whatever it was in that morning, the way that I kind of addressed that moving forward was I would either use a Smith machine or a really high pin pull with just the bar and we never start at the top, but get it to the top and then lower slow until I felt pain or I felt it grab. And then right at that point, pull back up and do sets of 15 or 20. And then since I worked as a trainer, this would be something I was doing every couple hours. And then over the course of the next couple days, just keep lowering that position all the way down until I could get to a deadlift off the floor. These were not loaded or not that much. So if it was a Smith machine, like a dime per side, if it was the rack pulls, the dime per side. The only time it became a quarter or a plate was when I was at that level. And normally after a couple days, I would be at that full range of motion, and then Friday be fine. There was one time though, when it was a dynamic squat day. And when I used to do a lot of the seminars in the past, the way they were set up would be a Saturday and Sunday seminar, kind of a little bit like the train your ass offs that I do now, but way more watered down. And I would have to always leave the gym and go straight to the airport. So there was no shower at Westside. So when I'm getting to the airport, I still have on horse liniment, smell like shit from training or not, and would just deal with showering when I got to the hotel later. But this one time, I snapped my back, popped my back, whatever you want to call that, during that day. And I remember, driving to the airport, having to, put my car seat way back, and some people who are listening to this have been in this position before. You're doing whatever you can do to be able to find the most comfortable position that you can actually drive in, but still see the road, which is a challenging thing. And sometimes you're almost lying all the way back. And then there was the flight, which is sitting for a longer period of time. So just getting it worse. As soon as I got a point here. So when I get through this, when I got to the hotel, I went to the exercise room, hopefully trying to find a bar or a Smith machine or something just to be able to get blood in it, to start doing some kind of motion, to be able to free it up a little bit, because the seminar that next day had, hands-on applications associated with that. And I did the best that I could with dumbbells or whatever was in there. I can't remember. And so we sit through the lecture part, and it was a speed, agility, quickness conference. And so they divide up. So half the people go to the weight room so they can learn how to lift weights. The other half go to the field so they can learn, the agility ladders, cones, A skips, B skips, C skips, just all the things associated with SAQ, strength, agility, quickness. I opted to go that direction even though I was by far the biggest, heaviest person that was out there, because I didn't really know a whole lot about that. And I had clients at the time that were squash players, and I figured there's probably something here that I can learn. I don't want to say there was no option, but I didn't want to opt into an option of just being the one guy that's going to sit and watch everybody else, especially when I'm the strongest person there by far, the biggest person there by far. So I didn't want to look like a kurd, being the person that's just sitting there not doing it. So I went through and did all the crap that we had to do, the skipping lateral moves. I don't think I did the agility ladder. I don't remember that. Maybe I did. And after that was over, and the next day, all the back issues were gone. So I'm not saying to do that, but what that did in my own brain was solidify for myself, I'm not a physician here, that if I have an issue like that, the movement and blood flow that I can get in there, the quicker it's going to be able to recover and the better it's going to be. So that was my takeaway from that SAQ thing. As I move up through into lats, torn lats, I can remember tearing one, and I don't want to sit there and say that that wasn't a problem, but it was something I could train around. I can't remember anything that I had to really, or train through. I can't remember anything I had to really change, because of all that. It wasn't a detachment. It's just a bad tear. I mean, it did get black and blue and stuff like that, but it wasn't what I would call a full tear. It was, and I don't want to say that it's part of the process, but some pulls just kind of come with the territory. There's the one that I can remember was tough, to be able to train through that one. Ribs or intercostals or obliques or whatever it is, we just say rib popped out. That was another one of those that happened a few times. Again, and this is a reoccurring theme, and I probably don't suggest it. And, I'm not a physician. Those were always kind of trained through with just, a knee wrap around it or wearing two belts, one belt to support that and another belt underneath that. Keep going up through there. We get to pecs. The first full rupture tear I had before coming to Westside. I've told the story several times, but at that point in time, I was almost ready to just walk from the sport because I've already been in it at that point for close to a decade, and total hasn't gone anywhere for a few years. Just tore my pec. The surgeon that did the reattachment told me everything inside the pec looked terrible, that, all the other tendons around the area looked terrible, and I would probably never bench 400 again, which implanted something in my brain I had to deal with for a while. But part of the decision of coming to Westside was, so I would never have to go back and ask what if, because I was thinking that at the time, that if I walk now, but Louie's telling me all these different things, and the things I don't even really believe in that much or are ignorant about. And if I didn't do that and thought back later, say now, thought back, man, what would I have done had I done that? I didn't want to be in that position. So I had the pec reattached, went to Westside, and that one took a little bit longer for recovery, because at that point, with some of the other injuries, some of them that I've noted that, I was dealing with, I figured it'd probably be a good idea to actually listen a little bit more, or half of what I was being told for that, and had reoccurring scar tissue for about a year and a half after that. I have an article on EliteFTS.com going into the things that I did to be able to cease the tearing of either the scar tissue or slight muscle tears, because a lot of those were pops as well, that I would go and see my ortho that repaired the pec to see if I retore it, because that's kind of what's always going through your brain with that. And that was never the case, but it became problematic because it was happening frequently, and it became more of a timing thing, where if it happened far enough out from a meet, not that big of a deal, but if it happened within 4 weeks to the meet, it became a big deal, because I wouldn't be able to bench at the meet. I needed a few weeks to be able to kind of contend and deal with that. To paraphrase or summarize some of the things that are in the article, I ceased doing any direct isolation pec work like flies and stuff like that. I did super high repetition reverse band presses. So I would set that up so the bar is basically zero. So if it was a green band, I believe it was a quarter per side, and if it was a strong band, a plate per side. And the goal was to be able to do 100 repetitions straight and to try not to flex at all, just grooving that range of motion, because if I flexed, my triceps were going to give out way sooner than anything else. And I wanted, why 100 reps? I don't know. It just was what Louie said, I suppose, or what I came up with. It seemed like a number that's going to be a high enough number for the mobility of the joint to get blood flow into the area to help it heal and so forth. And saline injections were part of this as well. I don't know how much it was actually the saline or just the needle tearing through the muscle. Still haven't had a definitive answer on that one. And it is one of the things I'm curious about through time. That the second pec was a bench shirt accident. And with that one, it was, as the bar was lowering down, the bar, shifted hard to the right. It's not videoed, so to me, it felt like 6 inches. At that time, and for years afterwards, I used to bust Bob Young's balls by saying that he actually pulled the bar just to, blow off my other pec. That one was actually a little worse to come back from. No, it wasn't worse to come back from. It was worse as far as how it looked. So the first one, I didn't have any bruising at all. I did have some ranges of motion I could not move in. For instance, if I laid flat on the floor, put my arm out to my side, I could not pick my arm up. I could not unrack a barbell out of the bar. Otherwise, I probably would have just trained around and through the whole thing. With this one, my whole arm was black and blue. My whole chest was black, side was black and blue. But I was able to still have all the range of motion that I needed, as a lifter. And the tendon didn't tear. I can't remember if I even have it looked at or not. I believe I did. And the tendon was partially tore, but it was more a full pec rupture. So pretty much all the way through the pec. And with that one, treated it kind of the same way as I've treated other injuries in the past. I've talked about it on other podcasts. I don't change the training. So I still did max effort work, but it would be very regressed to a point where, say, it was a 3 board press with a dime and a 5 on each side with a very, very slow tempo and pushing it. I don't want to say fast, but pushing it enough to where that side was straining and the other side was just kind of along for the ride. The reason why I started doing that was because on the first one, when I got back up to, 365, 385, closer to the 405 range in training, I still had that implanted in my head that you won't bench over 400 pounds. And it wasn't that my brain was like, screw you, I'm going to prove the doctor wrong. I really didn't care about that. It was, this is where, if it's going to tear, this is where it's going to tear again. I don't know where that idea really came from, but that was kind of implanted in there. So with this one, I didn't want to deal with that because I wanted to be able to strain on it as soon as I possibly could. So straining through and actually making a lift, regardless of what the weight was going to be, was more important to me from that mental standpoint. So I wouldn't have to worry about that when the weight started to get heavier again. It's bro logic, but it was logic that worked for me because I've already mentally strained with, I don't want to say heavy weight, but with weight that was all that could handle at that time. Again, it's not medical advice, not therapeutic advice. And that's how I move forward there. So I'm at the pecs. I get into the shoulders. I'm going to start trying to rush this a little bit because there are a lot of other questions here, but there's a lot of good stories in these. The right shoulder at one point started to feel like somebody was driving a nail into the shoulder joint. And that became problematic because it started to impact my lockout, and the cortisone did not make any difference there when I tried that. I did learn one lesson that I think I brought up on the Derek Wilcox podcast, that during that same time period when it was fully at its worst, I went on a cruise, which was kind of like a deload. And then when I came back, it almost felt like I had no issues at all. So at that point, I started to connect the dots that I had to increase or decrease the frequency of the load on that area, either by changing exercises that are going to put less stress in that area, or max effort becomes, dumbbells for that day. Most of it was pivoting to the exercises that put less stress on it for me. In other words, the max effort exercises where I didn't feel it, balanced more so with the ones that I did feel it a little bit. That bought maybe another half a year or a year until it came back tenfold. And then the surgery was to go in and remove bone spurs. I think that's all it was for that one. And after that, my mindset was, if the surgery was done on this day and my follow-up was 2 weeks later, when I go to the follow-up, I want to have full range of motion. And so I did a lot of really stupid shit, to do that, because that's what I did at the time, was a lot of stupid shit. And when I say that, I'm not talking drugs and stuff like that. None of that really changed during this time. It was just forcing range of motion. I can remember doing some things. And around this same time was when we were developing the first shopping cart that EliteFTS had. So I was on the phone a lot. And so I'm on the phone at the time speaking with the guys that are helping with the development of the site, and put a stability ball on my kitchen table, and then put my hand on the side of the ball, then use my other hand to be able to pull my hand up. And of course it hurts to begin with, but once you get up there, it hurts like a bitch. So in my mind, what I'm thinking is, because you got to be, doctors, be careful what you tell people sometimes, because when I came out of surgery, what he told me was, while I was in surgery and they removed the bone spurs and everything else, they moved the shoulder through its full range of motion in all directions. So I take that to be, okay, the only thing that's stopping me from having this shoulder go full range of motion is my mind and my pain tolerance, because structurally it can do it. So that's how I was kind of approaching this through this time frame. And so I got to where that wasn't a problem, but a few days before, because I knew they were going to have me do a wall walk, where you walk your hand up the wall or walk the door, whatever it's going to be. And I was practicing those and really having no success over that. So I had this brilliant idea, again, on the phone with the developers at the time, where I took a sled strap and put it around my wrist and then put a 5-pound plate on the other side, opened the door, threw the plate over the door so it would yank my arm all the way up. And it did, and it hurt. This hurt like a bitch. And my ranks up there with some of the worst pain I've ever had in my life. It hurt like a bitch. And I didn't have the foresight to think, plus you're in pain at the time, how in the hell I was going to get out of the position, because I couldn't reach around, to the other side of the door to be able to grab the strap. And my hand is now up high, and this arm didn't have the mobility to be able to grab that strap to be able to pull it down. Keep in mind, I'm not thinking straight at the time because of the pain that I'm going through. So after listening to the guys on the other end of the line to laugh their ass off because I'm explaining what I'm doing this whole time period, and they're dying laughing because of how stupid I am. And then I'm telling them that I'm kind of screwed right now and I have no way out of this situation. And one of the guys said, well, why don't you just grab your wrist or grab your forearm or the crook of your arm and push your arm down until you can reach the strap. And then I was able to get out of that concoction. But I will say, when I went in for my follow-up, I did have full range of motion. The downside of all this was, yes, I was able to rush the recovery and the training back. And when at that time, when I was thinking about restoring mobility, the only thing I cared about was the mobility I needed, which was to hold a squat bar on my back, to be able to bench in an arch position, and to deadlift. Anything outside of that, I didn't give a shit about. To me, that was restoring full mobility. That was recovery done. The downside of that was within the next year, they had to go back in to pull out more bone spurs, and there was a torn rotator cuff. So I'm not going to say I didn't rush that procedure either, but I will speculate that had I let that recover the way you should, I probably didn't need the second one. The second one was rushed again, but I took maybe 4 more weeks longer than the first one to be able to recover and to come back from that one, which eventually led to where the shoulder is now, which needs to be replaced, which was diagnosed in something like 2003, and still haven't had it done because I don't want to have it done. I don't have pain. I just have range of motion issues that I can live with those. And the success rate that I've seen on shoulder replacements are not good. So my bench still sucks. My bench has sucked ever since that period, but I can deal with a poverty bench more so than an unsuccessful shoulder replacement surgery. So where are we at now? So, oh God, neck, I'll just skip over that. I can't think of anything bad there except for, the herniations or whatever's on my imaging, which doesn't mean anything to me. Teeth, I've broken almost every tooth that I have. Just last week, I had to have 4 root canals, but those weren't new root canals. Those were to be able to correct root canals that I had in the past. So, eating shitty is probably not played a role into that. But where the issues really started to happen is breaking some of the back teeth from the grinding is what, I don't want to say started the process, but I'd have to look at the dental chart. More than 6, have been broken before they made a mouthpiece for me. That I didn't know at the time was creating a lot of the neck issues that I had that would run down through into the shoulder blade. So there's that as I move up through. Never broke my nose. Many times training have blown blood vessels in my eyes, which I suppose are no big deal, especially when I work for myself. So but to the point to where there's no whites, it's just red. And I kind of thought that was cool, but probably not so much. Doesn't happen very much today because I think people are smarter with their training. And keep in mind, most of all these things happen in training, not at meets. Head, I used to, and this was started before Westside, I used to headbutt the bar before heavy squats. And one of the things that used to fire me up is, I'd headbutt the bar and then the blood would, start running down my face. But every now and again, I could see the blood fall on the platform. And as soon as the blood would hit the platform, I knew for a fact there's no way I'm missing this weight. And so I have a dent, in my forehead from that. Over the years, it was stupid to begin with, but over the years, it wasn't a problem. But once I got to Westside, I started getting red lights, red lights for that. There was one time to where, and I get this one, there was one time to where it shot, it basically spurted out and hit the head judge, which is kind of funny, but it was a red light. There was another time where it did that, but was also all, running down my face as well. Didn't get red lighted on that day, but afterwards it wasn't something I could just like wipe off and it would stop bleeding. It just kept freaking bleeding. So all I could find was a knee wrap. So I tied this knee wrap around my head, to stop the bleeding. And Bob Youngs was a handler of mine at that meet, and his girlfriend had come in to visit, who I've never met before. He ended up marrying. And so after the squats, you have the break between the squats and the benches. I go out into the spectator area, if you want to call it that, where all the chairs are that people sit and read books, that because nobody's really there's really no spectators. It's just people there that know people that are in the meet that are just bored out of their brain. So I go to see Bob, and he's sitting next to his girlfriend. So I come down and I'm talking to him, and then he tells me as soon as I sit down, because he looks to Sarah, and he says, that guy that you were just asking about, the one that you said, like, who's that stupid idiot that you just whapped his head on his bar? This is Dave. And I cracked up laughing, but also kind of felt a little bit like an idiot, because I got a knee wrap around my head. But actually, no, I'm incorrect. On that one, what happened was halfway down, I passed out because of I think I concussed myself, because of that. So that kind of plays into the story as well. So that's from head to toe. The fastest way I can do this. I'm sure I missed some stuff. So anyhow, that was the first question, was the injury history. So if I click A, then it should give me the next question. All right, question number 2. What motivated you to start EliteFTS, and how has your vision evolved over the time? The motivation to start EliteFTS was, told this a lot of times, so this I will be brief about. I was working as a trainer at the time. I was also training at Westside Barbell. Louie Simmons was doing seminars, and I was doing some consulting, I guess, kind of what people would call, I don't want to say it was online, it was more phone consulting at that time. And I was also at a point in my personal training career to where my billable hours per week were between 40 and 50, which anybody that's been a trainer in person knows that's like 70, 80 hours a week that you're in the gym. I just had adopted my first son and was trying to figure out how I was going to be around, as a parent. And I didn't know what this looked like. And going back to that SAQ conference, the one good thing that I think people miss about conferences and networking today is I met Bill Parisi at that conference. So when I got to this point in time, and it was also a point in time where I had a lot of long-term clients that were asking me about, especially when you have a child, future, what are your plans? And I really didn't have any plans because the only thing I cared about was powerlifting and my total. So while I went to school, and that was it didn't start that way, but when I went to school, it was to take classes to be able to learn how to become a better lifter and then to become a better coach per se. But there was no scheme of here's what I want to do. The personal training thing just came about because my degree was in exercise science / nutrition. I managed gyms before that and didn't really want to manage gyms. A position came up for it. So it's kind of how that hand landed in there. So I'm having literal meetings with some of my longest standing clients who are all, in the executive field, some were lobbyists, but entrepreneurs, CEOs, CFOs, trying to come up with different business plans and ideas. Then I went out to see Bill because one of the ideas was to have a personal training center. Kind of made sense. I was a personal trainer. I had a waiting list. I have all these billable hours. And the one theme that kind of came through with all these conversations is to not rely on just one stream of revenue, so, and one of the things that Bill told me is, he had the sport conditioning center, but then he also, as part of that, had the commercial gym, so if one's not doing bad, the other one can kind of float it and vice versa, and hopefully not both go bad at the same time. So the personal training idea, sport training idea kind of faded to the wayside pretty quick because the one thing I knew that I did want to do was to, pass on the information that I knew to help other lifters become successful. The problem that we were running into with that is, what am I going to do? Start a magazine? The internet really wasn't, it was a thing, but it wasn't what it is now at that time. And I didn't want to do that, so that became the anchor of this is what I really want to do. But then the other side from the mentors that I had were, but how are you going to pay for it? And around that same time, I was answering questions on the internet, and then I had the Q&A, which was online, which is just me answering questions the same way I kind of am now, but in text format. So that led into, I think, online retail. If I have the online retail, then if the online retail can pay for the content, then that solves the problem of being able to put the content out. Plus, if I can put the content out and I can do it complimentary, and then nobody's going to have to worry about, hiring trainers, which was at the time. And then later on, having to join a paywall, to be able to get information. And so or even buy a magazine subscription. Because when I was younger, even, going and buying the magazines I had to mow lawns and shit to be able to buy Flex magazine, Muscle magazine, Strength Builder, or Strength and Health, and all those other things. So, if I didn't have that revenue, to be able to buy the books and the magazines, then I wouldn't have access. And I realized that not everybody had the same access that I did from a young age of being around older lifters to kind of help guide and mentor, which is what I wanted to do, was what they did, because training is 1000% changed my life. So if I can be what they were to other people, then that's what I want to do. the biggest hiccup, and it's actually been still the biggest challenge over all the years of being in business, is how do you keep the content complementary? And we've done it through product sales, but there's a balance there, because when a lot of and it's been this way since the day one. So when the balance is going into the content, there's not a lot of revenue left over, because retail is not a high margin industry. There's not enough capital left over for paid marketing, or digital marketing or any of those other marketing things. So for 20 years, we didn't have paid marketing because we can't afford it. It's also one of the things that differentiates us from our competitors, because there's a reason why our competitors don't have all the content that we have. And it's because there's a balance, man. You can't have all this complementary content and then have all this capital and revenue for ad spend and be profitable. So for most our competitors, if not all, they go all into the digital marketing, the ad marketing, basic things that a business does for sales, where we've always been all in on that content marketing. But looking back over, 26 years of business, that's been the biggest obstacle that we've had with scaling, is that. Because then you end up with, you pull some people in, but most of the people just will absorb the content and leave. For instance, on YouTube, just on the podcast alone, 71% of the people who will watch the podcast on YouTube are not subscribers. And I'd say, just people who absorb content in general, we would be lucky if 0.5% actually buy product to help support the articles and content that we put out. Where in my brain, it's, well, shit, if we can just go from 0.5% of everybody that, finds the education that's provided of value, if we can just go from 0.5% to 1%, then we have no cash flow issues. We have no problems with revenue. But that's not as simple as what that sounds. So, God, man, that wasn't even, so that's where it is. So that wasn't a fast one either. So answer, next question. If you like this and you want to see the extended version, that's where the real good stuff is, go to the link in the description, or just search EliteFTS, join the crew, and we'll see you on the other side.
Maybe you've hit your first plateau and you're thinking of hopping on gear, but you realize you're already too small because you're too scared to put more weight on the bar. What do? You can support the podcast and get access to the EliteFTS Table Talk Discord, which has some of the most valuable information you'll ever get. Access to hundreds of ebooks, assuming you can read. Go ahead and cancel your OnlyFans membership to your favorite bear. Because on this Discord, we have a lot of bears. There's also a great form check section, where no matter what kind of lift you're doing, post a video, tons of people give you great feedback. Or maybe you're doing your own programming like down here. Well, there's a great section on the EliteFTS Discord where you can upload your programming, people can look at it, give you feedback, and telling you that maxing out 5 days a week makes about as much sense as not wiping after a massive Taco Bell dope. You gotta wipe. There's a button you can click, there's monthly prizes, you can win things like apparel with shirts, bands, all kinds of bands, endless amounts of bands.
Did you know only 30% of Table Talk listeners actually subscribe to our YouTube channel? Our goal is to get that up to 50%. So before we continue, go click subscribe.